I understand my voice is getting very low today, but I'm not able to help it. So, and above all, I'm not the speaker for today, so kindly bear with me for today, and I'll try to diagnose again, and I'll try to improve the voice. I feel pleasure to invite Dr. Gandham Panikumar, and let me brief him with you. And as just now you were there with Professor P. Srinivasa, and he acquainted the participants with how to utilize ontologies in program analysis. Now we have Dr. Gandham Panikumar with us. He will acquaint the participants with how to apply ontologies to the materials domain. That will be too informative for all of us. Dr. Gandham Panikumar completed his BTech in Metallurgical Engineering from IIT Madras. He has earned his PhD from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, in metallurgy. After being a guest scientist at a couple of places, he joined IIT Madras as a member of faculty in the year 2005. He is currently a professor in Metallurgical and Materials Engineering Department at IIT Madras. His current research interests are phase field modeling of solidification, solidification of undercooled melt, thermal field and distortion analysis during welding, laser-based additive manufacturing, and integrated computational materials engineering. Thank you, sir. Thanks for being with us. All these research interests that you have go just above our head. I couldn't understand even a single word from this, but what I am happy for is you are utilizing semantic technologies in your work. And that is what we are very interested for today. I have your abstract also that I will share with the participants, and I have already put it in the shared space. So over to you, sir. We are so keen to listen to you.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for introducing me. So I want to also thank Professor Srinivas Kumar because he introduced me to Dr. Sarika Jain. At any point, if there is any question, please feel free to interrupt. I will also be giving you short interruptions during the talk so that our attention span can be managed. So today my session is on applications of ontologies to materials domain. Like Dr. Sarika Jain mentioned, there was a time when the word ontology did not mean much to me because I was totally new to that. And over last 3 years, I taught myself with the guidance of several people and have started using it. I want to share my experience. So you may not be learning very new things in semantics because there are experts to teach you those things, but you will definitely see how it can be applied to a domain. And my objective is to enthuse you to take up more applications so that the advances in semantic technologies can be brought to the other disciplines. Okay, so let's get going. So just an outline of how I plan to do my session today. I will give a brief background. I will skip the ones for myself because Dr. Jain has already introduced me. And then I will give an introduction to ICME. It's important. There's a lot of business around that. So it's worth for everybody to know about that. And I will mention about the status of semantic representation in materials domain, both in India and in global scenario. And that is where I will just cover, how others have started to use these aspects in materials domain. It will give you hints on how we can also try to put a semantic web to applications. And I will mention how I am using the semantic technologies in my group, what are the tools I am using. And here is where I solicit your support in making me aware of more tools that are already developed and mature, so we can put them to good applications in engineering domain. And I will introduce one slightly longer example of crystal ontology, which links crystallography knowledge and that basically tells you the depth of how much we can do with semantic web. And a very brief example on concept onto. I have already made an app for you to browse through that. I will give a link of that app also. And then I will wrap up by posing some challenges and opportunities in this domain which will hopefully enthuse some of you to offer application case studies, which would be very interesting for everybody in the domain. Now, a background about me has already been done, so I will not go through that. So I want to upfront, I want to tell you that one of the ontologies, namely the crystal onto, has been developed by my student Srikar, who spent about an year, and he's currently doing his PhD in Purdue University. So we both really worked very hard and got this particular thing out, and it's currently under consideration for publication. One of our project staff is helping me do some Python functions to get the Python Flask app so that one can browse these ontologies on the web. There was a summer intern with me through the Indian Academy of Sciences Fellowship. So he was actually from computer science background. He's a BTech computer science student, Anirudh. And he came to me and I offered him this topic on ontology. It was very nice because he comes with the Java programming knowledge. I come with a problem that can be done with OWL API. And together we could get some nice programs written, and it was very useful. And there is a scientist from Defense Research and Development Organization in Hyderabad, Girish. He is also helping in some Java codes, which will be in this particular ecosystem. And we will be sharing some of these on GitHub so that these tools can be used by others as well. So before I go on, I want to also thank a couple of people who I think will be also of interest for many of you in the participants. So this is one of the persons, he is Ram D. Sriram. He is Chief of Software and Systems Division at NIST in USA. He is an Indian alumnus from IIT Madras. He used to visit India every year, and during his visits, I had hosted him and we got talking. And then he introduced me to some of the ontology resources, shared his slides, gave his books. And then every 6 months when he comes, he would ask me what has the progress happened, etc. And over last 2.5 years, it has helped me a lot in gaining knowledge in this domain. And Ram Sriram actually also is the director of the program called MGI, Materials Genome Initiative in America, which funds a lot of programs on bringing the materials knowledge to a maturity level to be able to discover new materials. And in that sense, it's good to know how some of our ex-colleagues are doing very well in USA in guiding these kind of projects that are good for the entire scientific community. The second person who guided me a lot is Professor Ishwaran Subramanian. He is a native from Chennai. And when he comes to India, he had come a couple of times with Dr. Sriram, and I had the pleasure of hosting him in IIT. And we also got talking. He actually is into ontology work a big way. And he had also helped me in thinking along these lines through his discussions when he visited Chennai. He has been helping a society in Bangalore on public policy. And so those of you who want to use semantic web for government policies and analyzing large data, etc., can look at his work, which is available from his website in CMU. Of course, I have to thank Professor Srinivas Kumar because he has been helping me in giving guidance at IIT Madras. Several meetings we have had, and he has been giving me tips on what are the things that we should keep in mind, etc. So on knowledge engineering, I'm grateful to him. And Professor Narayan Swamy and I, we go back to IISc during our PhD days, playing in the hockey field. So we got talking, and he, along with me, has started to go on with the semantic web path, and together we have some collaborative activities, and he has been also guiding me. So I am thankful to all these people for helping me get into the semantic web. I have had some discussions with Dr. Vinu, who is a student of Professor Srinivas Kumar, and also, of course, Dr. Raghava, who is known to you because he is a second speaker in this workshop, and they have given a lot of tips over email. And I look forward to such discussions from many of you as well. So just a couple of slides about the kind of work that Professor Ishwaran Subramanian and Ram Sriram were doing. It is to basically look at texts and represent them and bring them into the triplets that we require as axioms. So the concept that was used by them was to use the Sandhi concept of Sanskrit language, where you can join the words by removing some of these aspects of grammatical importance, but not necessary for conceptual, and then joining them so that we can bring out, and by analyzing the distance between those phrases within a sentence and across sentences, relationships can be discovered, and thus from a text one can bring up an ontology. And this work is available for us to read on the net, and I would encourage you to have a look at that. They have also suggested certain tools like Leximancer and Gephi, which were used in analysis of this. Initial piece of work was done by document entry manually with a user, but later on, of course, it can be done by automatic term generators using these tools. And then, of course, there must be curators to sort of analyze and remove some extraneous axioms so that the knowledge is actually sensible. So I found that this is very useful because most of the knowledge till now, particularly in our domains, is all captured in plain text documents. So to get it out in axiom forms is tedious if you do it manually. And this technique I found very useful. So a small distractor at this point. A question to you so that you just refresh your attention span. I will have several of these coming as we go along. So what is special about this photograph? Just take a few seconds and write the answer in the text, the chat box in Google. I have the chat box open in another window. Let me have a look at what you answer. Feel free to write. Okay. So there's a question from Dilip Kumar saying that he's only seeing the slide 1. I am actually on slide 8. Is there anybody who has seen slide 8?
No, sir. Actually,
No,
it's in
no, sir.
slide 1.
I see. So it's important. So what I will do, I will stop and again present, because otherwise sometimes there are these glitches in Google. So I okay, are you able to see? No, not yet, right? You are unable to see the slides being changed. So I would then do one thing. I would only the present the screen. Okay. Okay, you are able to see the slides change, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So we will leave it like this. I wish it would be in a presentation mode, but looks like there is something wrong there. Sometimes it happens due to the kind of window manager we use. So we will leave it like this. I was going through these questions, these slides. I introduced those who contributed to this work, and then I wanted to thank 4 people: Ram Sriram, Ishwaran Subramanian, Srinivas Kumar, and Narayana Swami. And then I said something about their work where they used Sandhi concept in Sanskrit language to combine the words, look at the distance between those words in a sentence and across sentences to form axioms in triplet form. And one could also make them come through tools such as Leximancer or Gephi, and then also have curators to look at that. So this is something that I was talking till now. And at the point I stopped, it was basically a distraction question to get you going with some amount of interaction, which is very useful. So in the chat box, please tell me, you are seeing an image with a bunch of people putting their hands in a very spooky manner. I'm asking what is special about this photograph. Has anybody seen that till now? All of you who are into semantic web are automatically in artificial intelligence. So that's a clue. You can write, whoever writes it in the chat box, then we'll move on. Any guess? No guesses. Feel free. Though it's on records. It's
Hands are more and faces are less.
okay. So you are suggesting that. Of course, you could count and comment on that. Dr. Jain saying that there are also Nobel laureates. Interesting. Linking knowledge of people is something. Yes, of course, they might have had that in thought. Let me then tell you that basically it is a photograph from 1947 in one of the earliest meetings on cybernetics. And the second phase that you see is John von Neumann, the mathematician you all know in computer science. Von Neumann is a very important person. And then there are many others like Norbert Wiener. Norbert Wiener is very important in semantics, one of the earliest workers in this subject. So many people, when it comes to artificial intelligence, they say that the earliest such meeting was in 1956 or something in Dartmouth College. But there are some articles which say that this meeting in 1947 is perhaps the very first artificial intelligence meeting in the world. So that was the specialty about this. That's just a distractor. Okay, let's get going. Okay, let's get going with our discussion. So I wanted you to know about what is ICMA. So the way I introduced is as follows. Okay, if you look at first of all, why should you bother about materials domain? So if you look at the journal articles in Science Direct or in Springer publications and look at the way they are categorized, you would see that material science is categorized on par with engineering, okay, and energy sector and mathematics, etc. So which means that it's a fairly big domain. It's not treated as a small subset of engineering. It is being treated on par with engineering. So you can think that material science is very broad. Even in Springer, it is listed along with life sciences and geography and energy and engineering. So it's a very broad domain. Today in IIT Madras, we have about 60 people working in materials domain, though the Department of Materials has only 30 faculty. The reason is that people in physics, chemistry, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, many of them who do research are also falling in the domain of materials. So I want you to basically remove this notion from your mind that materials is a very small aspect of one particular branch of engineering. It's not true. It's an aspect of study of nature in terms of materials useful for engineering, and therefore it's a very broad subject. Look at these objects. You are familiar with them on the day-to-day life, right? Alloy wheels. Today when you buy a car or a bike, you prefer alloy wheels. These alloy wheels are made of materials called aluminum alloys, 6000 series aluminum alloys. And you may be interested to know that these alloys were developed something like 40 years back. Okay, it took almost 25 to 30 years to make these materials suitable so that you can buy them in the consumer market. Apple Watch, you would have seen, it was launched a couple of years back, and it is now today one of the favorite gadgets of many young people and rich people. This Apple Watch casing is made of a material which is same as what is used to make the aircrafts. It's aluminum alloy, 7000 series aluminum alloy, and this material is very strong and very light, which is also good for the watch. Again, here Apple would advertise this as the most modern material that they developed in the last couple of years, and of course charge you $1,000 for the watch. But this class of alloys has been developed 30 to 40 years back. You would have also been using laptops and tablets which are very light, and most of the lightweight tablets are having a casing. The casing is actually magnesium alloy casing, and which is also very light. And these are all objects in the consumer market only in the last few years. But again, magnesium alloys were developed sometime in around Second World War. So what is the reason why it takes so long to develop these materials before they come to the consumer market? This is something that all of us are worried about, because as an investor, when we put money in a company, we would like the product to come quite fast into the consumer market so that we can take benefit of the consumer market growth and the success of the product, and therefore the stocks that would rise, etc. Right? So the reason is as follows. It is actually not something specific to these materials. You would see that any common material that you are familiar with have taken a long time before it came to the market. So look, for example, today, in the morning, if you have had dosa, you would have seen that it was made on a tawa which is Teflon coated, non-stick tawa. Non-stick tawa is so common today, but it took about 30 years to develop Teflon as a material before it could come to the consumer market. Between 1935 to 65 is the time when Teflon was developed, and today it's a very common product. You have Teflon coated clothes for waterproof jackets, and you have Teflon coated wires for proof of electric shock, and you have Teflon coated gadgets to protect them from environmental effects, and Teflon coated tawa to make your non-stick tawas to make those or whatever. So like that, lithium ion batteries are today very common. You have them in your pocket. Your mobile phones are made of mobile phones have lithium ion batteries in them. But you will see from this graph that it took again 20 years to develop lithium ion batteries before they came to you. Velcros are very common in our day-to-day life. All the shoes have Velcros in them, and it's there in the suitcases and all those packaging. It also took 20 years. So you can see basically that most of the things that we take for granted in this today's day-to-day life are actually taking about 20 to 30 years time to develop. Okay, it's a fact across the domain. And obviously, we must do better than that because one cannot take so much time to develop new materials because it doesn't help the investors to invest in companies for R&D for development of new products. So what do we do? So naturally, you can see that many of the major directions in science and technology are from America. So during Obama's presidentship, he had launched a major initiative. That initiative is called Materials Genome Initiative, something like Human Genome Initiative, where you try to sequence the human genome and understand how the diseases come. He said that we could perhaps understand how materials behave, and then we can accelerate the development. So you can see from the graph that before MGI, you can see if my mouse is moving. Before MGI, you may take long time to develop some product. Time to market is very high. And after Materials Genome Initiative, you should actually shrink it so that you can have the time to market as much, much lower. So what used to take 20 years or more should take within a couple of years is the dream. And the reason why they thought it was possible is because you have, in the last 10 years, a lot of computational tools. And you have also a very large variety of experimental tools. And we have the internet very well developed with very high speed, so people are very well connected. And then, of course, there's a lot of digital data. Today, there is no equipment which does not come with a computer attached with it. Okay, even our refrigerators have a computer inside. Okay, and our microwave can talk to the internet through IoT and all that. So today we have an infrastructure. It is ready for us to succeed in reducing the time scale for the market. And how does one actually do it? Is it possible to do it? This is something that enthused some aspect of it, and they put down certain objectives in the document. And in the last 9 years, this document has been used again and again to improvise to make the products come faster to the market. Now, this is something that you would have seen before the lockdown, but maybe during the lockdown, people are not flying very much, but definitely many of you would have flown in the aircraft. So what is the component of the aircraft that hits the ground when the aircraft lands? Basically, it is called the landing gear. Okay, landing gear is a very important aspect because an aircraft actually, when it lands, it's almost like a controlled crash. Okay, with controlled crash, and then you are on the ground. So naturally, the material that withstands that kind of a shock when the aircraft lands with so many tens of tons of weight, that material has to be really very strong as well as very tough. So actually, as a matter of fact, the landing gear is the strongest and the toughest material in the world. Okay, and these materials are very high end, and it is very difficult to produce them to change the type of materials later on to handle different sizes of aircrafts, etc. So it takes about 2 to 3 decades to develop a new landing gear. And you know that a landing gear is necessary even for you to land an aircraft. So that's how the delay in the designs will happen. It takes a long time to design these things and deliver. So there's a company called Questec, which has delivered a totally new landing gear material in about 3 years. Now that's quite shocking because what takes 20 to 30 years could be done in 3 years. And how did they do it? So the approach they took is being given as an example for what I mentioned in my abstract also, namely ICME. That approach is called integrated computational materials engineering. That is basically taking advantage of computation so that we can accelerate the development of new materials. Now, this is very good for all of us because if new materials can come to the market, it's good for all of us. Okay, and then the NRC document from US government says that ICME is an emerging discipline that can accelerate development of materials and it will unify design and manufacturing. And there are 4 pillars for ICME, and one of them is semantic knowledge. Okay, that is where actually it's of interest for all of us in this workshop because semantic representation of knowledge is being seen as one of the 4 pillars of the ICME approach. So there are people who are basically interested in the knowledge engineering coming from a totally different angle. Okay, so are there documents for us to learn about this development? Naturally, yes. All these documents I am mentioning are available at the website of the Minerals, Metals and Materials Society in America, tms.org. If you go, all these documents are available for free. They're already basically reports generated by committees which are commissioned by the US government. They are funded by the public funds of America. So the documents are of public nature. So we can just go register ourselves in the website and download those documents for free. And they have survey results of so many scientists in research, in academia and in industry. So they're very valuable in that. So the first document on ICME is what we have taken initiative from. And that document talks about many, many things, including how ontologies can be used to accelerate the development of materials. Okay, and many, many such documents have come up and they're all available for free. Okay, and the latest of them are meetings which are being held, and you could see that these meetings are talking about the 3D printing of materials, additive manufacturing, artificial intelligence, etc. So this is where I want to also enthuse you, saying that if you are looking at applications of artificial intelligence or applications of semantic web, then please consider materials as also one of the application domains, because there are events that are being held on that, and there are funds that are available, and it's a materials domain where there's an end use that is readily available for us to touch and feel. So it is one of those applications apart from consumer market. These are all B2B cases that are of very much sought after. So let us go further. NASA has launched an initiative to put a vision document for 2040. Okay, normally in many places in America, many of the funding agencies or organizations, they have these vision documents put out so that they plan how the technology development should take place. So they did this document under a contract, a government contract, and they have put up how we can place a roadmap for integrated and multi-scale modeling and simulation of materials and systems. So when I say materials and systems, the kind of systems that you would have heard, I think on the second day, day 2, the first talk was by Uma Shankari. So her work, for example, in ISRO is about systems, basically, and every system contains a lot of objects which are made of materials. And so that is the kind of roadmap that NASA is basically proposing. And if you look at this graphic, the item 6 is about the data, informatics, and visualization. So it is about essentially, again, under informatics, it's about semantic intelligence. Okay, so semantic intelligence goes hand in hand with the roadmap for making this vision come true in 2040. And you can see that NASA actually has put up a document. This is available for free. You can go to the URL that I gave and download the document to see how they are planning to integrate semantic knowledge in the vision for materials and systems in 2040. And I am giving an excerpt from that. Okay, and I just read out the sentence that I highlighted here. The excerpt says that these is actually a recommendation, a set of recommendations from NASA. And the recommendation number 3 is going as follows. These standards should explicitly address data ontologies and semantics necessary to permit communication across materials and system-related disciplines and across associated length and time scales, as well as robust information management infrastructure to link experimental simulation data at various length scales. So this is basically highlighting a particular need that is in materials and systems that are for space industry, there are very complicated things that are put in place, and for a robust information exchange, semantics are a very important component, because it becomes very difficult for humans to basically link information across so many different segments of their complex system. So we must take the help of a computer to do that kind of a reasoning across length scales and time scales. And so semantic web has a very important place in this development, and this is something that I want to enthuse you about. So please do go and have a look at this document from NASA. Now, going further, this document actually places in perspective also the kind of aspects of this particular semantic web. So if you see, this document has a lot of those items. So I'm taking only one item out, namely the item number 6.3, to say that how do we go about defining a structured approach to building ontologies and define a common ontology or semantics to permit communication across materials related disciplines. And if you see the first column, AC, accessible, it says that yes, it is possible to make it accessible, and maybe it's too early to say it is adaptive. Okay, so we are actually being a bit careful on that, and it may not be interoperable at all. Okay, so we are keeping that blank in the column. Under RB, robust, we are saying yes, which means that we would like to have robust methodologies to link communications across materials disciplines using the ontologies. And traceable, yes, it is possible for us to trace every axiom that goes into the knowledge base, so we can make it traceable, and it can be made user friendly. Okay, and I will mention a couple of ways by which we have also tried to make it user friendly. And what's the kind of time frame that NASA is looking at these technologies to mature? You see that the time frame is proposed as 2022 to 2035. So you can see that any development in ontologies or semantic web in materials and systems today is going to be seen as ahead of time, because the prediction of NASA is that it is going to happen from 2 years from now and further down the line. So if we are doing these activities today, we are slightly ahead of time, and that's good news, because then we can actually contribute to this subject significantly. And what's the kind of funding that is required for this kind of a research? You could see that it is projected between $500,000 to $2 million a year. That's a typical funding for a research group. So you can see that it's a mid-range funding of availabilities, and which means it's also going to indicate the kind of funding that will be available for government sources when they project projects on semantic technologies. So this is very positive thing that is coming down. Okay, so again a short interruption. Okay, guess who is this person? By the way, there is a thread to all the questions I'm asking. I will tell what is that at the end of the session. So for now, just see how you can guess. The person, he looks Indian. Okay, that's the first clue. He is knighted, so you should call him Sir. And he has a very unique distinction. He is a fellow of Royal Society and also fellow of Royal Academy of Engineering. It's very rare to see a person who is both a scientist and an engineer. Very rare. Okay, so any guesses? Who is this person? You could write it on the chat, and I'm also giving about a minute time, because I know that many of you are very quick with computers. So you may take an image grab and you may put the image in Google and ask to do image search, for example, or you may take the clues, copy paste, and put them in Google and rely on the Google's semantic web aspects to see whether this is going to be searchable. So I want actually this to be seen as a challenge. If those things are very mature, that we could actually guess. No guesses yet? At least one of you please respond on the chat, because it also tells me that you are awake. Okay, Sumit Kumar says no sir. Fine, no problem. At least I know that you are responding. Okay, no guess. It is an Indian, definitely. Of course, not from India. Okay, there are Indians who are not from India. Indian origin, basically. Okay, no problem. So I'll just tell who that person is. The reason why I'm mentioning that his name also is obvious. So he is actually Professor H.K.D.H. Badishia, Harry Badishia, we call him. Sir Harry Badishia. He's a professor in the University of Cambridge, and he started making the Bettius algorithms public. Now, whatever program he writes, he'll keep it in the public. We are talking about his website predating GitHub. Okay, so all the source codes are made available to public 25 years back, And this is what he said about artificial intelligence. He said neural network analysis has a liberating effect on material science. And he's suggesting that we should increase the use of that and make it as a standard part of curriculum in the undergraduate courses. And when did he say that? He said it in 1999. He said 21 years back, he is saying that neural networks is very important when we should have it in the curriculum. So you can see that today we have a lot of attraction to machine learning and deep learning, etc. So these things are actually not that new. I mean, people have been using them for a while, but there are visionaries like Sir Badeshia who said that they should be brought to students' curriculum. But obviously, we are very, very lethargic, and I would say a lot of inertia is there for our systems to modify. So it's very difficult for us to imagine. Luckily, there are elective courses, so that's good for students to use these technologies. But yes, I mean, this is a sign that there are people who can foresee future and ask us to go in that path. Okay, so enough of distraction. Come back to that. So the status of semantic representation in materials domain. I just want to mention how it is in India and abroad. So here is something about that in India. So as computer science folk, you don't have to be introduced about TCS, possibly the second biggest company on IT consultancy in the world and the biggest in India, etc. So this is a link. I have given 3 links on the page. You can look at them. So they have actually put up a white paper on how you can use ICME approach and IoT technologies to transform industrial processes such as continuous casting. Doesn't matter what is continuous casting at this moment, but I want you to know that TCS is investing quite big on these aspects. And 2 gentlemen here, BP Gautam and Sridhar Reddy, they have actually put up a document about modeling the physical universe on TCS website. And they are also leading these activities on ICME at TCS. And they have about 70 people working on this topic. So if 70 IT engineers are working on a materials topic, then you know that there is something interesting there. Okay, so if TCS is leading, and so definitely they have a product in mind, right? They must launch some product. So yes, they do have a product actually. This product is called Premap. I cannot talk about it much because I don't come from TCS, but I just mentioned to you saying that from a publication from that organization, it is known that they have an architecture in which informatics, soft computing, knowledge engineering, and knowledge bases are all part of the platform. Okay, so if you go and look at the document, the TOI link is available, you would notice that actually they have used semantic technologies in that platform. And this platform is increasingly being adopted in the industry. And of course, you can ask TCS more about it. They'll be very happy to sell the case to you. But from my side, I say that it's a very proud moment because in India, the company is making a product on these technologies. Okay. So in the worldwide, actually, you'll also be quite interested to know that the knowledge engineering or semantic web or informatics has been brought to the materials domain by an Indian. Okay, it was Krishna Rajan, an Indian in America, who actually brought, and he's very way ahead of time because he thought of these before any of these technologies are mature to give an ecosystem for you to operate on. So something like about 20 years back, he had already thought of materials informatics and done a lot of research. And he's actually predicting that with increased adoption of this in materials domain, the data would actually swell in volume from terabytes to zettabytes. So already actually I can predict that these things are coming true because our own data is bloating up very fast as we start capturing more and more aspects of materials. And so big data is actually not something that is only for consumer things like Facebook data or so on so, but actually it's there for engineering applications as well. And among many things that Krishna Rajan has led the path in the informatics, he has also mentioned that it is very important that we do statistical learning from data, not only physical learning. So there are 2 ways. Normally, many of us in traditionally taught, we learn from the data through constitutive equations. We always look for some physical phenomena, write an equation that describes the process and try to understand the data. So that is the right hand side of that, using constitutive equations. But Krishnarajan suggested that we must actually also look at statistical learning, which today, of course, with machine learning, it is becoming increasingly possible, but actually also capture that learning in the form of knowledge, so that axioms can be drawn from that. Okay, so that kind of an aspect, which is basically approximate reasoning, has been proposed by Krishnarajan long back. You can see that many of these review papers are dated like 4 or even 6 years back. And it's very interesting. In this slide, my own research area is mentioned here, is phase field simulation. So you can see that, by accident also I would have discovered Krishnarajan's work, going by our own work also. But it's very nice to know that there's an Indian who actually led information revolution in materials across the globe. And among many things that he designed and talked about in in the article which I have linked here, he's saying that the role of materials informatics is pervasive across all aspects of materials science and engineering. And he is actually asking us to look at these as a very large set of aspects which has to be fused, which has to be come together. And he's saying that fusing has to be done by informatics. So what I want to propose here is basically saying that this fusion of research across various aspects of materials can be done basically through semantic linkages. So semantic knowledge becomes the glue between various aspects. That's a lesson that we take from this kind of a research that has been done. Okay, now which aspects are being done in which countries? If you see, I must say that there is a materials ontology developed in Japan about 10 years back. Okay, Ashino, his ontology is quite old, 10 years back. But in China, there is one scientist group, Xiaoming Zhao. His group has been working very hard at semantic web technologies in materials domain. And I have noticed that it is very highly advanced. So in the next few slides, as I mentioned to you, you would notice how advanced the semantic knowledge representation has been going on in China. And this is a very important thing for us to also learn and try to emulate and grow in our place also. So what they have done? They have done in this manner that they have basically analyzed how materials people talk about the material and their processing, their performance, etc., and have defined various relationships. Now, if you look at the relationships, they are actually camel case. If you split them along the capital letters, you can make an English statement saying that a material has a processing, which is an instance of the class called processing. Okay, or materials has a performance, which is an instance from a class called performance. So you could actually imagine that these linkages are basically capturing the triplets, the axioms, and each of the relationship is named in a camel case, so that if you expand, it will be like an English statement, so that you can show it to the user for user input, etc. And they have then gone ahead and linked it with various means. So Xiaoming Zhang's group has developed a web GUI, so that you could actually generate a query, send the query to a reasoning engine, and decompose the query, and make it as Sparkle queries, and of course have a wrapper to basically make them as native queries to the SQL endpoints or to MataML, etc., and bring the data to the GUI, so that the material scientist or the user at the browser is able to look at the information as a rendered information, which is in plain English or in a graphical manner, so that the background work, that is the English language question, being analyzed and then decomposed into questions that are basically posed on the data sources, and then composing those results back to display. This architecture is something that is very powerful. And they claim that this architecture has been implemented, but there is no public website where we could go and try it out. Okay, so that's a weakness, and we may not expect it very much because some of it may be covered by IP. But in my group, we are actually trying to do it now publicly, so that anybody can go and see it. I will give a link for that in this talk shortly, and you can also try it out. So at the background, there's a preparation process that goes on, so that ontologies are being created, etc. So you could see that the architecture proposed by the Chinese group in Xiaoming Zhang's group is quite mature. And at that point, they also were actually looking at ways by which representing the materials so that for automotive sectors, like for example, Audi, BMW, Jaguar, in those cars companies, if there's a material that is used, you could actually then reason out and say what type of a material that is and which alloy that is, etc. So materials and the supply chain management, etc., for different automotive companies can also be analyzed through semantic technologies, but that requires us to put in place a semantic representation for materials also. Okay, it's not enough if you put it only for the automotive companies or supply chain. Even materials ontology has to be put in place, and they have done that. And they have taken advantage of a particular, database that is already available in public, Yago. So you might have already played around with Yago. So you have the vocabulary that can be picked up from there, so that you can use that to talk about these relationships. Okay, so this is how they were actually going and implementing. So there was a review paper on the development of these ontologies, and here is some kind of a path how it went around in the last 15 years. And you could see that the very first ontology on materials by Ashino was dated around 12 years back. And then you have Premap, that is a ontology developed from the TCS group, and that is dated about 8 years back. But in terms of the representation, in terms of expressive power, they have not rated it very high. But you could see that there are some new ontologies like Slack's ontology, OntoRule Steel ontology that are rated very high. If I take the DL expressivity of SROIQ, then actually our ontology, which we developed in our group, would actually come right at the top corner. Okay, that I would claim. It is something for you also to comment. When I share it across, you can also comment on that. So it's a lot of scope to grow on materials ontologies in the expressive power. Many times it doesn't happen, mainly because materials people don't know much about ontology, and the ontology practitioners do not know about materials. So it is this crosstalk that is what is not happening, which is preventing these applications from coming in place. And I would like to basically encourage that crosstalk. And I'm doing my first bit by coming to your conference and talking about materials ontologies. In terms of the kind of languages that are being used by these people, you could see that the Premap actually was using UML. Okay, whereas there are others like Math OWL, which is using OWL language, which that it's an international standard, ISO standard. So you could see that the domain axioms can be either weak or strong depending upon those languages that they chosen, and whether it is modular also, etc., can also be looked at. So you could see that there's a lot of gaps that are there, and you don't find very easily an OWL language, but then a strong representation, but then the rule set is actually SWRL. You could see that something or other is missing. So you could see that if you think of an ontology that uses OWL standard but has a strong domain axioms, uses SWRL as the rule set, and the method should be bottom up so that it can come from the crowdsourcing, and is modular in nature, and population of instances should be done by a materials on a web-based interface. If you see, there's nothing like that. There's nothing like that. So which actually means that in the last 5 years, perhaps somebody would have developed, but we are also one of those few who are trying to develop. There is definitely a gap in the market, which talks about ontologies for materials domain in standard languages with strong domain axioms, with well-established rule sets, and having bottom-up approach, and also modular in nature, and allowing for crowdsourcing. That is I would say, a big challenge that is good for all of us to tackle. Okay, and a couple of more comments on whether they support what kind of features, etc. You see that some of them do not support semantic queries. Some of them do not have a visualization. Okay, you could see that there are a lot of gaps that are to be addressed. So when we develop our ontologies, we are very conscious about that. We want to ensure, of course, knowledge organization is well taken care, but the concepts have to be global in nature. We would like to also make the publication of those data in the internet so that people can build on top of those. And we must have an inferencing that has to be done automatically. So in our group, we are addressing that. And semantic queries support should be there, and visualization also should be there. So you can see that when you want to achieve all these goals and develop an ontology, it is not very easy. A lot of hard work goes in that, and it is a collaborative effort of multiple people, and that's where all of us, working in these kind of technologies should come together to make sure that each of these projects actually become very useful, and then do good to the community, because they're all public, they're all kept in public domain. Okay, so at this juncture, again, a small distractor so that it will refresh your attention span. So the question is as follows. You know that lead is banned. You cannot use anything that has lead in them, and the US has taken that decision and it's imposed it on all others. So by prohibiting lead, they actually ended up in a materials problem which cost billions of dollars. Nobody is going to eat those objects, and unnecessarily they banned lead in those objects maybe, but it cost billions of dollars. And this problem is so important that NASA has a dedicated website for this problem. Okay, and I have given a clue in the visually, and you could see that some hair-like growth between the different electrical components in the image that is shown. So what is this problem? Anybody knows? All of you who are using computers should be aware of this, because it is a problem that can make your computer simply go to dust. It's a materials problem, but it can make the computer not work. And it was a problem actually in many computer boards at certain time. Today it's avoided. Any guesses? I want you to only guess.
Nanomaterials?
That's good. At least I'm getting response. I want you to interact, because when we interact, we stay awake. We are more enthusiastic. So nanomaterials is not the correct answer. Any other guess? I am giving a clue. It's about avoiding lead. So it's about lead-free materials being used in electronics and giving a problem. Okay, it's true. Madan Kumar Lakshmanan says RAM slots. Yes, it is a problem in RAM slots also. It will actually roast your RAM and make it unusable. This is a materials problem that has made even a Challenger mission of NASA crash. That's why they put up a website for that. Okay, it has given problems across the board. Okay, so it interferes with other materials is a question. Yeah, it does interfere, but not by yeah, O-ring Challenger is interesting. Yes, but this is not the same problem. O-ring Challenger also is a materials problem. It's a different problem. Okay, it's a different problem. But this problem is, I will give you the answer. The answer is basically tin whiskers. So basically the idea is as follows. What they were doing is that instead of lead, which was used in the joining of the electronic circuits, they use lead tin solder for joining electronic circuits. They said no lead, so let us use a tin-based solder. And when they use tin-based solder, because of the high speed at which the cooling is done, the tin actually is not in an equilibrium state, so it grows out of the circuit, and it grows in like a whisker, like long thread, and then it will go and touch anything physically available nearby. And tin being a metal, it will be basically like a short circuit. So this happens slowly over several months. So when the board is inspected in the delivery, it looks good, but you use it for a month or two, then the whiskers have grown and then they have done short circuit. This is a problem with the zinc also. Okay, so this is a problem of what is called whisker growth in electronic circuits, and it has cost billions of dollars. This is because of inadequate understanding of materials, and of course they underestimated the importance of materials domain at that time, and of course later on they funded it very well, and now these problems are under control. So you can go to the website in the NASA website there on whisker, and you see that there's so many links on how this problem has caused damages. Okay, yeah, so let's get back our attention to ontology. That's a small distractor. Okay, get back to the ontology. You see that Zhoming Zhao's group has done a lot of work, and I will mention that they actually have made a three-layer architecture: knowledge base layer, and the reasoning layer, and application interface layer. This is a very good clue, because we could actually work on each of those layers separately, while each layer becomes very developed for interaction with the user. So while application interface layer is looking at how to convert an English language question to Sparkle, for example, the reasoning layer can work on how do I capture more and more DL expressivity in the automatic reasoning. How do I capture more definitions of SWRL, semantic web reason, web rule language? There are many descriptions of that language, but all of them are not available for reasoning. Pellet Reasoner, for example, 1.1 has only a subset of SWRL that is supported. So while some people work on that layer to improve, then there are others who can work on just the knowledge base. Whether you are able to reason or not, we can at least put the axioms in place so that the knowledge has been developed. So this architecture of 3-layer is very useful, and I think it's a good contribution from their group. And of course, it has a lot of impact on engineering in manufacturing and on costing and ecological aspects also. And they went about by making some of those T-box, A-box axioms public. And I must say that I never saw these rules, SWRL rules, and I created them, and then I saw their paper and then found that they were just ahead of us by just 2 years. Okay, so we were 2 years too late in publishing that work, but doesn't matter. We went on to discover slightly better ways of representing this. So, for example, here is a SWRL rule, which you could see that we are asking whether is it a steel or not, what composition does it has, and can you call it an alloy, and what elements has it, does it have chromium, and how much chromium does it have, and if it has more than certain amount, then you can call it as a stainless steel. So what materials people write in plain text language could be converted to an SWRL rule, which can be inserted in an ontology, and you can then reason out. So automatically categorizing materials under different classes can be done. We have done that in our group, and I found that was very powerful, because we now no longer need to rely on humans to do this categorization. And many of the knowledge that is required for this categorization is already available. I must confess that not all of those rules are possible to be expressed as SWRL. Some of them we had to write it as Python functions to update the class definitions, but they're available. Okay, so this is a very nice use cases. You can see that many of the times when we see examples of SWRLs, you don't see very long rules like this in examples. You have very simple rules to illustrate that concept in the tutorials. But here is a case where you can have almost 10 to 15 or even 20 clauses that have to be merged to make the SWRL for a materials domain, and that's should enthuse you to look at this, because it really tests the limits of these representations. And I must also confess that I have crashed Protege tool a couple of times because I have given rules that it found too complicated to reason. So there's a long way to go for us to take advantage, but what is already there is very good. We can represent many of our knowledge in that. Okay, and they went on to also capture these things across projects, aspects, and objects, and they started using it for even materials cost, product cost, etc. estimation. So it actually is a proposal that when we represent materials ontology, we actually can represent even manufacturing ontology, and then also the domain of product selling, product procurement, and etc. what goes on in a big plant. So you can see that it's an enabler. Okay, a materials ontology is an enabler to go on to actually explore what happens in a big plant. And that is something that should enthuse us to look at these aspects. And some of these, the alloy wheel I mentioned to you earlier, right? Alloy wheel is an alloy that is made from 6061 alloy. And that alloy wheel can be analyzed now using the ontology, what properties, what processes, and what values it has, etc. So today this is doable, and this has already been captured. And though the ontology of Zhang's group is not public, our ontology is public. You can go to semantic.iitm.ac.in. It's available, and you could represent any of these alloys to capture these kind of knowledge graph quite readily, and in a satisfactory manner, as certified by materials people like us. And there are some things that I want to also mention to you here. In the Chinese ontology, they have mentioned everything as a property or as a parameter, but in our ontology, we have made a distinction between object property and data property in a very clever fashion, so that the data properties are used and reused, and object properties are giving much more variety that can be done. So you don't have unnecessary values coming in, mixture of these two. So the thinking of data and object properties has sunk in now. Okay, in the older ontologies that is not very clear, but today it's very clear. We can actually decide which ones go into data property, which should go into the object property. So here are certain example SWR rules to say what is a tool steel. We should say that it's any steel that has a particular composition, but there the carbon has to have a particular value, and it should have certain limit, and it should have certain type of a heat treatment. So you can see that the metallurgical knowledge is being represented as a SWRL rule to call a particular material qualified as a tool steel or not. And this is very powerful because it can help us in making some of the materials knowledge be visible to others who don't have that knowledge, but use it in their semantic reasoning. So this is very powerful, and some of this has been done by us also in our ontologies. And of course, they have tried to reuse certain things that are there in the market, which is very good. Yago has been reused a lot, and I think that's also something that we should learn from by making use of the data sets and vocabularies that is there in the market for our development. Okay, and they have used it also to do the reasoning using the Jena tool set in Apache, and they have used WordNet also to use some amount of vocabulary so that the experts can start giving knowledge which actually is then represented as an ontology inside. And this is something as a dream. I would like that we develop this kind of thing in India for our own defense and strategic sectors so that our domain experts can benefit from this. Okay, and I just skipped that. I just mentioned to you that they have made a point about linked open data sets, which also can be converted to chain triples, which is basically linked triples of knowledge base axioms, and that can be used to basically extract knowledge about metallic materials into the open domain. This is something that today it is mature, it's available, and it needs to grow furthermore. Okay, we have some. I have given some of the slides partly also to alert you to representation of knowledge graphs in materials domain, and I have given the references so that you don't have to search for them again. Okay, so I leave the some of these slides away for you to explore definitely, and these links can be then used to learn more about them. Okay, so today this representation of materials knowledge, you can see from a very recent work, 2018. This representation of materials has allowed us to generalize some of the knowledge. You can see that a very specific material has been cast in terms of a very broader context of what is called alloy. And as you go broader, you are going in the opposite direction where it is becoming very, very specific. For example, you say an alloy, among them there are copper alloys, and there are bronzes, and there are castable bronzes, and then there are these specific alloys. So you can actually understand materials in a broader context or in a specific context, and the linkage is provided by the ontology. And that is the power of materials ontologies being made available. And of course, if they are publicly available, then the benefit is for everybody. Okay, so very recent work has been able to show these things. So there are certain developments in materials domain I want also to bring to your attention. Materials project is a repository of very expensive calculations on electronic structure calculations done by researchers across US. And you can go to materialsproject.org website, and you would see that the repository is available with an API interface so that you can look at the results done by others. So you can then propose ontological linkages between those data so that you can actually reason out, so that you don't have to go by only the numerical search engines to look at a particular data. You can also go by reasoning by text also. So we have done that for Materials project. And there's another database like OQMD, which is also very similar in nature, which is not been attempted on that. So that is again a project that somebody can take over. So you have these materials repository of data that is available in the internet, but a semantic representation of that is not done yet. So there's a lot of things that can be done once we overcome the barrier of looking at materials data with the help of any materials person. And after that, a lot of semantic projects are available for us to benefit from. Okay, again, a small distractor. Here's a question. The reason I'm asking these questions is also with some intention. So you could pose a Sparkle query for this question on let us say, a data set in the public domain like Wikidata, for example, and you would see that it's not that simple yet. Okay, the question is as follows: a 2 times Nobel Prize winner did not believe that nature would allow 5-fold symmetry. Because of his adamant nature, one had to wait for his death before the scientists could convince peers about the materials having such symmetries. And the person who did that won a Nobel Prize for himself. Who is that person we are talking about? Okay, and the clue is golden mean. You know that when you take two Fibonacci numbers and take a ratio, and that ratio will tend to a particular number called tau, which is basically called as a golden mean. It's a irrational number and one of the constants in the nature. The ratio of length and breadth of a credit card is also golden mean. Okay, the ratio of length and breadth of a ideal passport size photograph also is a golden mean. So what is this we are talking about? Who is this person who won a Nobel Prize in materials only after the death of another fellow who actually objected to it for so long? Guess, wildly guess. Okay, Bardeen. Okay, you are trying to guess. Yes, Bardeen has won the Nobel Prize, but it is not him. So golden mean should be the clue. Okay, golden mean Fibonacci series should be the clue. Thank you, Madan. Pauling is the right person for the first fellow. Pauling is a fellow who won the Nobel Prize twice. But the second fellow, he is what I am asking for. It was only after Pauling died that the second person could actually convince people saying that there is five-fold symmetry in nature, and then he won the Nobel Prize. So you got the half of the question right. What is the other half? Who is the fellow who got the Nobel Prize after Pauling? Shetman, great, super. Okay, at last I got the correct answer for the quiz I am doing. Yes, Dan Shetman is a person who won Nobel Prize for discovering quasicrystals in 2011. You know that he had to wait a long time after Pauling died. And in the quasicrystals, the atoms are arranged with the five-fold symmetry, as you can see in this image. If you go, yeah, thanks, Simon. You are welcome to Google, because I want to also test how good Google is in understanding semantic aspect of your question and answer. Of course, that is also the intention. If you go to Taj Mahal next time, you will see that there are a lot of these tiles in the Taj Mahal which are five-fold symmetry, and they were done 450 years back. But these tilings based upon five-fold symmetry are called as actually Penrose tilings. Penrose actually belongs to this century. So why do we call those tilings after Penrose when we actually have them made 450 years back? The answer is very simple. The West is biased by its own names. West do not want to give the East any credit, and that's the reason for it. Okay, so even the so-called golden mean Fibonacci series were known to Indians 800 years back, but we still go by those who are from Europe only few hundred years back. The reason being very simple. History is written by winners of wars, and history will go by the narration that is done by the West, which has won. So of course, the reality need not be like that. Okay, so this is just to tell you that a lot of things were known to Indians well before these things, and we must actually know the truth. Okay, so let us come back. The reason why I mentioned the story of Dan Shetman, etc., is also mainly to inspire to you, saying that many of this research about quasicrystals happened in India also. Okay, in India there are people who have discovered some of the types of quasicrystals after Shetman. Of course, if you do it after Shetman, you don't claim the Nobel Prize. That's okay. Okay, so in my group, now I'm going to little bit talk about our group also. So I'll just go. So we are using Protege to do the knowledge representation initially, to do the prototyping. Initially, I had to do the manually entering the axioms and then importing the OWL axioms from a spreadsheet, etc. So that's how we tried. And later on, we started to edit the ontology using a Jena API, using the programmatic approach. I myself would prefer Python programming, so I was waiting for Python interface. So in the last couple of years, already has come up with a Python interface that's very nice. So it can do quite a bit of work. It's not as developed as Jena API because it cannot still do an explanation, but it can at least do the reasoning. So that is what I am using right now. So we now have a way to convert knowledge that is captured from a web interface to a triple store DB, and from there do the reasoning. So that is in place. The reasoning is done by Pellet. Initially, I have tried with Hermit, but Pellet can handle SWRLs quite well compared to Hermit. So I'm now settled with the Pellet reasoner. And Jena also has that reasoning on the back end. So some of the Java codes are able to do the reasoning directly using the Jena API. And we are rendering the ontology onto the web using OWL verbalizer. It uses SWI Prolog language program to convert an ontology into English language, controlled in English language. And then we also use Ontograph to render the ontology in a graphical manner. So both these are available for free. All of them what I am using are available for free. So that is what we are doing. Querying of these ontologies is done by Arc on command line, and Fuseki using a web interface. So Sparkle queries are being written. So I had to teach myself Sparkle to extract information from the ontology, and that has been very enriching because I realized that not always you need to represent knowledge. Some of it can be represented as a graph pattern within a Sparkle query also, and you can actually update the ontology with the new class definitions. So sometimes the expressivity of the ontology need not be there explicitly. It can be there in the querying engine also. It's not the best way, but one can at least run the show like that. We could also do RDF query using the RDF library of Python in Already too, but it is very highly limited in its expressivity, but at least it is doable. So one can do RDF querying also. We were using SWRLs for rules, and wherever I found that the language of SWRL is not supported by pellet reasoner, then we fall back to Python functions or Java functions. So we do it manually basically. So this is a cripple. So you cannot do a very 100% semantic application. You still have some programmatic aspect of it, but as and when the reasoners are developing, then we can do rest of it also as rules. And explanation benches right now is a serious limitation in Already. It cannot do explanations, but the Jena API is able to provide explanations. Even Protege also does that, but Protege is only for desktop, whereas Jena API you can write a program to do it to the unknown user on the web, etc. So here is where again I seek help. If there are people who are very good at providing explanations given an inferred axiom from a known ontology, then that help will be quite appreciated. I just introduced you to an ontology, crystal ontology, which we developed, and this is as follows. Okay, we basically want to bring materials informatics into the domain of crystallography. Okay, and the way we do it is by developing an ontology which is able to now reach the expressivity of SROIQ. You could also see that you could go up to that kind of a depth, and a fairly large number of axioms can be represented. Okay, and the way we do it is as follows. We basically take the Neumann principle, which is known in the crystal physics, to state that symmetry elements of a physical property of a crystal should subsume the symmetry elements of the crystal. So this is a knowledge, and we are capturing this knowledge as an ontology, which then allows us to represent it in a very powerful manner. We can answer questions which are not easy for any search engine to answer, and even a human to answer readily without the necessary information available. But the ontology is able to answer because it has been captured very nicely. And I want to mention that this required us to get straight two things: the ontology as well as the crystallography. Both have to be understood very well to put them together. And it was done over a period of 1 year, and my student Srikar has helped me in doing this. He has actually put a lot of effort in making this ontology. So he's a major contributor of this particular ontology. And we have, of course, put it up in the public domain for you to take a look at it. So there is a materials project database that is publicly available, which we built upon so that we don't have to typeset all those axioms. And there is a Python library called PyMatGen, which is allowing us to programmatically use information about this database. So there's an API available which we used. We have used Protege for the architecture of the ontology. We have used OWL API on the backend for programmatically creating the axioms, and we have used SRL to do some of these rules that come from the crystallography. And this is the workflow that we have used. Basically, we have used the Measure Project database, extract the data using PyMatGen, and then create the crystallographic data in an axiomatic approach. And then we feed it to the knowledge base directly, and we also take it to the OWL API so that we can create the axioms. Okay, and from the knowledge base, we create information about various data like Schoenflies data, etc., and we feed it to Protege as imported ontologies. And once we do that, we also add some rules which we have written by hand, knowing the crystallographic knowledge, and those are put into Protege. And Protege is then launching the pellet reasoner on the backend to come up with inferred axioms. And then we feed the inferred axioms also into the knowledge base so that the knowledge base now contains both inferred and the asserted axioms. and that can be then queried. And by querying, you can get the information or the knowledge that you seek. So this is actually now as a workflow that we have established, and we were able to test it out. And we were able to capture these kind of informations. That is, we are able to capture the formula of the compound, materials ID in the materials project website, the different elements it contains, what are the point groups information, space group information. These are crystallographic information, crystal system information, space group information. All this information which are hidden inside the crystallographic aspects are now made explicitly possible in the materials ontology that we have created. And then we describe various properties, both the data properties as well as object properties, so that we can then make those classes. And then we can start putting certain roles so that we can have those relationships made. And you could see that the relationships are also done in a camel case, so that we can make them as English statements as we like. Okay, and then we also make certain roles which are classes defined for asserting whether a particular crystal can be exhibiting a piezoelectric property or not, etc. We have created specific classes for that. So these can be dynamically done as your requirement of the knowledge can grow. And so this is how the formula and the elements are linking and talking to each other. So you can think of this as 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 layers of information that are being linked. So in terms of network, you can say that there are at least 4 layers you have to traverse before you can come to the specific item that you are going to use for reasoning. So naturally, the reasoning is actually going to be time consuming. Okay, and then we are able to then write complex classes and do the class definitions in Protege. These class definitions allow us then to do a lot of these things. Okay, and write DLCF rules. So you could see a typical DLCF rule, SWRL rule. You could see here, such a long thing. Is it a phase? Does it have a polymorph? And if so, then what is the space group it belongs to? And then what kind of a Pearson symbol does it have? What prototype does it have? What space group it belongs to? And finally, you can say what crystal structure it has. So you are able to actually arrive at designating the crystal structure of a material or a phase by traversing this entire rule and populate those classes very nicely, because the rules are coming from the knowledge base coming from both crystallography as well as from the ontology. So that fusion of both these aspects is what actually is helping us come up with this. Okay, so I will give you some examples of how we were able to do this querying, and you will see the power of that. But before that, one distraction question. Okay, a distraction question is again useful for computer scientists. So all of you, as people working on computers, will be interested to know. Okay, copper is one of the very good conductors of electricity, but some years back in semiconductor designing, particularly 7 and 10 nanometer architecture of semiconductors, people have replaced copper with another metal for interconnects. Okay, that other metal is not very well known for electrical conductivity, but they have done that. What is that metal? And the clue is the name of that metal is used long back in Saxony for a devil. Okay, it's a mountain spirit, and because they were actually disappointed by the things that happen in the hill. So that usually people give names in the olden days about materials having some properties of a spirit or something like that. So that's how the name of the metal comes from. But anyway, today you can actually guess it. You can search in Google if you wish. What is the metal that replaced copper for interconnects? Let us see whether the Google is able to answer it. One answer has come. No, that's not true. Nickel is not true. Aparishitosh has mentioned germanium. Not true. Uma Singh mentions lead. Not true. Nishi Gupta, stainless steel. I am talking about a metal, only one element. Stainless steel is an alloy. Not true. Abhishek says sunshine. No. No. It's an element that is replacing copper in the semiconductor. Today, you see, if you buy an Intel chip, 10 nanometer architecture, latest processor, it will have that element in it. So it is there in all of your computers. why I am choosing this question is because I am a materials person, and I want to tell you that materials people are very close to the computer science people. Okay, aluminum is not true. The answer is cobalt. Okay, that's a surprise. Okay, cobalt is a metal that has replaced copper in the interconnects in the last 2 years. And the reason being, of course, it avoids certain problems and gives a very high speed up in terms of certain properties like adhesion energy, etc. So this is something that you will be interested. You know, you may be knowing that copper is very good electrical conductor, but that is not what is used as a interconnect. But at nanometric size, it's cobalt which does better than that. So at nanometric size, materials have different properties is something very interesting for us to learn. Okay, that's a question. But you can see that when you go to Google and ask this question, it's not ready yet. Semantic web has some more way to go. When you ask a question, you can't get the answer. Though Google knows everything, it can't answer so fast. That is something that you missed. Okay, anyway, coming back to our ontology, I want to mention to you a question like this. A question as follows. I want to ask a question. Tell me a compound which has iron and oxygen in it, and it should undergo a phase transformation, and upon phase transformation, it should lose some piezoelectric property because it should be unavailable for a system, crystal system, which it goes to. Okay, that is a kind of question that I am asking, and I will give you a question as follows. Question is like this: which iron oxide compound will actually lose the piezoelectricity property if it undergoes a phase transformation? That's a question. And you would see that ontology has worked, and in about 9 edges of a graph pattern is able to give the answer that it is actually Fe2O3 with an ID number 80. Okay, it has given the answer. And if I give that question in another manner, you can have different ways. So our ontology is able to give answers to various questions. Asking question like Fe2, which oxide of iron can exhibit pyroelectricity property? Which oxide of iron can exhibit polymorphism property? You can actually do all these things in a very nice manner. You can see that the rule, SWRL rule that is used is quite complex. It's quite long, and several crystallographic axioms are being used, and very simple A-type axioms also being used. So you can see that a combination of so many aspects of semantic web, that is class axioms, rules, and class definitions, as well as A-type axioms, all of them are being put to use to come with that kind of a reason. So you ask a question in Google saying a question like which phases may not exhibit piezoelectricity property under phase transformation. If you ask that question, it won't give you any answer, but our ontology can give you an answer. It will tell you what is that system, etc. So it just shows you that the expressivity of the ontology that you represent is very powerful once you start using every aspect of OWL. But of course, the internet search engines are yet to catch up with that. And that is the work that is pending. We need to do that hard work of capturing the ontology of domains so that it can be put up in public domain so that people can ask those questions and get answers for it. So we have now started to write Sparkle queries to come with these answers. And those Sparkle queries will have graph patterns, which sometimes are very short, like just 3 lines, but sometimes as long as just even 10 lines of graph pattern. So Sparkle queries are the way to go today. Tomorrow's session by Raghava about Sparkle introduction is something that I encourage all of you to do because it's a must. To know Sparkle is important for every ontologist, and I'm learning that it is a very powerful aspect of it. Okay, so we are able to today answer very difficult questions in crystallography thanks to the ability to write it in a ontology and ask the question through Sparkle engine. And I'm giving some examples of it already to you. And I will do that using another ontology also. And that is where I'm basically going to wrap up in the next 5 minutes. Another ontology we developed in concept ontology, where we are trying to put up different concepts. So in materials, we normally have been used to searching for a criterion by looking at the data. We do it with computer programs, APIs, etc. It's a very tedious way of searching. So if I ask a materials person to design a new alloy and give a particular criterion for the new alloy, it's a very tedious work. And we can make it a bit faster by enabling the reasoning also. So, but it requires the domain expertise. It requires the materials knowledge to be represented already as a knowledge base. That means we must have the OWL file for that materials knowledge. And we must actually put the reasoning engines to use. So reasoning engines like Pellet should be in place already. And of course, we must focus on the gaps so that our Sparkle queries are exactly alerting that gap and give you the answer. So that is something that we are doing right now. So here is an ontology that I created for concepts so that the different materials concepts are linked with the processes. They are linked with the behavior of the material. They are linked with the tools that are used to analyze the material. The technique that is using, the tool is using to arrive at a particular parameter, and which defect is caused by which kind of a process. So all these aspects of materials are being now captured. And it has been a tedious work over the last couple of years, but the OWL file is now ready. And I am happy to share that with you today. So you can go to that particular URL and there's adequate documentation available for that ontology. And you can already browse it on a Python Flask app on Heroku platform at the URL that I mentioned to you. You can just launch that URL and you can start browsing the ontology already. You can even search through the ontology. Actually, we have just put up a search engine, very simple one already in place. Not very efficient, but we will improvise in the next few weeks. Okay, so this ontology basically does a simple query as follows. Okay, I'm going to wrap up in next few minutes. So this is one example I'm giving you. Let us say you are 3D printing a complex alloy and there are a lot of cracks that are coming in. And cracks are not good for any object that you want to print and make. So there is a criterion in materials domain which says how to avoid that cracking. It is basically called RDG criterion, Rapa Dretse Dremod criterion. And we have captured that criterion digitally using ontology. And it talks about a particular parameter called liquid slope, thermodynamic parameter that has to be available. And we then ask through a Sparkle query a question, and then it does the reasoning is done by Protege. And the Protege is telling us that this RDG criterion can be called as a digital criterion. And the reason why it thinks that it can be called as a digital criterion is because I have supplied the following information to it. We said that the criterion involves liquid slope, and somewhere else we said that liquid slope can be measured using a technique called CalFAD, and somewhere we said that the technique CalFAD is offered by a tool called Pandat, and then we said the Pandat is a tool which is belonging to a category of tools called computational thermodynamics, and the computational thermodynamics is a subclass of computational tools. And then we gave a class axiom saying that a digital criterion is one which has an equation involving a parameter which is computable. So by putting these 9 different sets of information that we have put in, Protege is able to reason out using Pellet to call the RDG criterion as a computable criterion. Now that's a very good news for us because computable criterions open up a lot of opportunities for us. They allow us to basically, let us say, look at hotspots in a die casting, to know locations where defects can come. It can help in welding people for a car welding. It can tell you where the welding can occur, etc. It can help the manufacturers of OEM manufacturers like ANSYS or Abacus, etc., who develop CFD codes, FEM codes. They can actually add on features to say that these criteria tell you that there's a hotspot in this particular part of the simulation. So they can add value to those simulation software people. And of course, most importantly, it enables a predictive capability so that we can do an experiment correctly in one go. So the ability of a reasoning engine to add value to computational simulation is something that we are realizing through development of these ontologies. And I'm very enthused. So I'm actually spending time every week, several hours, to actually contribute in this direction to add axioms or add a little bit more features to the ontology. And I cannot imagine how much more benefit can come. So here is a wish list as a challenge. I think it is possible today. I mean, I'm telling from my own experience as a materials person. I think it is today possible to capture the experience of a domain expert of a knowledge, to capture his knowledge as ontologies by getting propositions and axioms created in a OWL file. And we can actually check the correctness and depth and usefulness of those inferences by contacting the domain experts. Here, Vinu's suggestion of creating questions automatically from an ontology will be very useful, and that technology is available. And the last thing is about the concept of removing humans. No, we don't need to remove humans from this endeavor. We have decades of learning by humans. Their insights and knowledge is all available. We can capture that partially in the form of ontologies, and those ontologies can be read by machines. So the OWL files created by discussing and talking to a domain expert is something that is possible today, and that is one we have to embark on. Okay, and here is a wish list as a domain user from my side. It would be very good to have a web-based portal for crowdsourcing of assertions from domain experts, automatic question generation for feedback from domain experts, a chat box linked with an ontology, and a controlled English to SPARQL translation. These are all topics I am sure Raghava, I will pose these questions to Raghava, and I'm sure he will have some suggestions for these. And I will also ask Arindam Chatterjee sometime tomorrow. I want to talk to about these things to Asha Subramanian also sometime. So definitely there are a lot of people who are in our community who can throw light on these questions. And I'm very sure that if this wish list can be satisfied, that the semantic intelligence can be brought to the domain experts very efficiently. And I'm sure that it will happen in the next several months. Okay, so with that, I want to thank you. And I look forward to your suggestions to bring semantic intelligence to materials domain. I will be very happy to also share my experience of creating these ontologies and axioms to you. There's a question on the chat box I will address at this moment. And just to wrap up, how easy was it to find answers to my questions using Google? That tells you whether your semantic representation was fast or good enough or not. Okay, let me just look at the questions. Prabhu Ram is asking, can we create OWL file? How long does it require based upon domain? How do we evaluate its correctness? Yes, we can actually create an OWL file very easily. I do it in multiple ways. Let me go back to the slides. I'm just telling you our ecosystem, how we are doing to do the ontologies. Okay, so you can see from the very yellow box, we can create the ontologies using the 3 different ways. You can use Jena API, you can use Already API, or you can use the Triple Store. I have done it manually in the beginning by handwriting, and then I have done writing programs and developing. I can share some of the OWL files with you, so you can see them and then actually see whether you can use them for your trials. Okay, so one of the difficulties in getting started in ontology is some good OWL files to play with, and I'm very happy to share my OWL files with you. They will contain thousands of axioms which you can run your reasoner through, or any of those. Okay, so I'll be happy to share them with you. Please just drop me a line email, I will share them with you. They are actually available on public domain. I'm only going to share the link with you, that's all. You can pull up the ontology yourself. I will be updating that ontology time to time because I am adding features to it. So you can just bookmark the link, pull up the ontology OWL file to your desktop, and you can play with it. The next question is about correctness. Yes, only the domain expert can tell whether it is correct or not, and that's where you have to interact with the domain experts. So for materials domain, I'll be happy to actually contribute to tell you whether we can evaluate those things to be correct or not. Domain experts are must to evaluate the correctness, but of course you must make the evaluation of correctness easier. So coming up with questions based upon the ontology is a very nice way to check with the domain experts. Here I want to tell you, you can look at the way ResearchGate is checking with the authors to check whether its database is correct or not. So by posing clever questions, you can actually get the correctness quite well captured. One question, Saransh Tiwari, how to measure the materials in materials domain ontology? Measure the materials as in, I didn't understand. Can you ask the question a little elaborately, Saransh? I didn't understand the question.
Yeah, like we can measure the time by using the time ontology, concepts of the time ontologies and something. So if we have the materials in a material domain ontologies like crystal and something, so which concept can be used to any amount or any quantity of particular concept?
Yeah, so here I would like to mention saying that the SWRLs can be used to make certain measurements within the ontology. It is possible, we are doing it, okay? Because SWRL provides a certain aspects to add, multiply, and all that things. So you can provide a computation that you can do measurements on an ontology using SWRL. But I must also warn you that the entire SWRL language is not captured by Pellet yet. So if you make a very complicated function, it may not run. Okay, so that is something where we can go back and forth. I'll be happy to discuss with you on what elements of SWRL are supported by Pellet, so that you can do the computation. Now, coming to the time aspect, I want to also warn you. Time aspect in ontology definition is only 2 years back. So there are no reasoners as of now who can actually represent time. So you cannot reason out whether something has happened before or after. You may have to write a function for it in a Python function or Java function. But reasoners are under development. I am hoping that reasoners will come in future which will work on it. This is also something that I am personally interested. If any of you are interested in using the time ontology to determine what is the duration, whether it is before or after, etc., I will be happy to give you test cases. I will be happy to give you even an OWL file which contains those axioms, so that you can try out also. Okay, because it's a very, very new thing in the ontology. The time ontology is very new. So there are not many implementations of it yet in the market, but it is very powerful. Okay, so please feel free to share your questions either through the organizers or directly to me, no problem. I will address them and I will pass them on back to you through organizers. Yeah, there is a link that is provided where you can ask questions. Yeah. So with this, Dr. Jain, I would like to wrap up my talk. I thank you once again for giving me this opportunity. I will be most happy to share my knowledge by coming back with anything from my. Yes. Thank you. Please also surf the links I mentioned to you. My own ontology is available for you to evaluate, and other ontologies are available. I'll be very happy to share these things to you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jain. And I think it's maybe time for you to close this session, and we can then. Mic is not working. No problem. So maybe I seek your permission. Do we close the talk now, so we can again assemble back? I think at 3 p.m. for the next session. That is by Asha Subramanian. I look forward to listening to her also. I will join. Okay. So will it be the separate link that is meant for the third session?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We will be using the EP link.
Yeah, fine. Third link. Okay. So
yes,
I will use it and I will join at that time. And thank you very much. And I hope this session was useful. I'll be happy to share slides and to you. And I'll also be happy to look at the recording of other speakers for my benefit also. And please feel free to also look at this recording also for others. No problem to share with that. Okay. So at this moment, then I will stop presenting. Yeah, good. Okay, yeah. Maybe you can also stop recording, then we know that the session is complete.